In order to do any serious maintenance on any knitting machine, you may have to remove it from its case and replace it after the job is done. So this movie is about getting a Corona knitting machine out of its case and back in. These machines are easier to get into than many. Each end of the bottom has these two screws which must come out. The back of the case has one on each end in this position, plus one of these on each end of the bed, and one of these on each end, and off will come the end caps. And the bed will now just lift right out of the case.
All right, let me show you on many machines that we've gone into to get the machine out of the case, you have to take the feet off because they go through. Sometimes you have to take the handle off, and sometimes these lock brackets off. On this particular model, they do none of those need to come off. You can see here's the Loctite they put on the screws to let you know they were torqued down. The only thing is there is a nut plate right there for the piece that goes through here, so evidently we didn't have to take those out.
Okay, we thought we did.
And we'll put them back.
Here's the rope that we're using to limit the movement of the sinkers. And for those of you who've been in conversation with me, I've described that rope as something that was designed to be upholstery welt cord because that's what where I think I bought it.
And this is the needle retaining rod. But what we're going to do is get this felting out so we can look down in there and see what we're...
We have been warned by a friend of mine who grew up working with these machines to avoid disturbing the sinkers if at all possible. Of course they move around, but she said don't release them unless they're broken. You'll be sorry you did. So far we have not. And what are these pieces of wire?
Yeah. They hook in the back, then they go under the screw head on the front.
Let's see, this is the front, correct?
Yes. If I pull this back, you can see how they're under a screw head.
So our piece of felt was in good shape. Right. Sometimes they arrive at their new destination with it all fuzz.
Right.
What would we use if ours wasn't in good shape?
You can buy felted material like this.
Is it that thick? What department carries it or kind of store?
There is an insulation that's about that thickness.
So Lowe's, that kind of place?
Granger.
Now this is the lamp wicking that I used. And to me it feels as though the rope is providing enough tautness, but that jumping around business of the floppy needles, maybe my lamp wick is inadequate.
That's what I'm thinking. This needs to be thicker.
We did perfect a replacement for the wicking that works much better, and the details are thoroughly covered in another movie. Now let's get this back together. First, we'll replace the felt.
What I've found is there is a little spot right underneath here. See where I'm putting the hemostats?
I'm trying. I think so.
There's a cutaway in this brace, and the hemostats are going under it. It's a little circular thing, and you may have to move this out of the way. So here's what we're going to do is we're going to take this end. You can see that. We're going to hook it under the hex nut that's up against that wall. Then we're going to try and feed this end, there you go, through. And
the cutaway area?
Yeah, the cutaway area. And that's what holds that in place. It goes underneath here and here. So what we really want these clips to do is hold these ends in place so that we can put it back into its case. So we're going to do this.
So probably once it's in the case, these are no longer quite as critical. It's a matter of getting it into the case neatly.
Yes. We're going to put this in.
And here Jack found that you have to wiggle and adjust a little bit before it pops into place.
There you go. Once you get it just right, it'll drop down, and I'll lift this to let you see. It drops down into this lip. I'm going to lift it up.
Go ahead.
See the screws here?
Here's a close look.
It'll drop down to those screws once you get the needle parts back up underneath it. And then we can start reassemble. If you'll notice, I offset this so that I can get the end cap on. All right. I will caution everyone, this nut plate is loose, but look at what someone's done. They've epoxied these nut plates in, because that way if you turn this over, they won't slide out of place. Now see, if the camera can look down in there, you'll see that one slid to the point where it's got to go back a little bit to line up to let the screw in.
So Jack did not do that. It's not the way he handles it. It is workable, however. But what you don't want is to lose the nut plates, because then your end won't fasten on correctly. Am I right?
That's true. Now these two screws right here have a tapered shank area, and they're the ones that go right in here. You can see the taper on the end is going to fit the flare of that. And so these are the most important ones to not lose.
They would be hard to find a match for, wouldn't they?
Yeah, because of that particular taper that's on there. And again, we want to start everything and not tighten anything until everybody's on their way. And again, this is where the nut plate moving will not let you line that up correctly. So you got to look in there and make sure that the hole is where it should be. I'm going to snug these just a little. You can see just a little finger tight, because this surface has to be flat. So no matter what anybody else does, these two guys have to keep this metal surface just below the plastic surface. And I know these big-headed screws are the right ones for the casing. And you can see as I tighten that up, it's pulling the casing flush with the end cap. Now what we had was in the back here, some of these...
We were missing at least one.
Right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start one on the outside edge so that we know we're in place, like so. And this one's missing. We're going to leave it missing until I see what I can do. I've got two, but there was one missing on the other end.
And by the way, it wouldn't be great for traveling, but that hasn't seemed to be any problem for knitting.
No, it wouldn't be, but you see I've got one here and I've got one here. That's critical to keep the ends from flopping.
So this piece really can't go anywhere.
It can't go anywhere. And then, of course, I've got these two guys. Now, there's one that goes right in here. And I would like to put that in, but we're going to wait because, see, this was one we found that had been replaced. The threads may be the same. I don't think they are, but it's way too long.
It's a little lengthy.
So what I'll do is I'll save one of these guys. Let me get it on the screwdriver where you can see it. And I'll go down in all of my infinite amount of hardware for knitting machines, try to match the thread pitch here and the length of the threads in another piece. And we want to get this one so that we've tracked it. All right, here's what I did. I took this nut out right there of this position. And the reason I did is look where I was missing a nut. it can only be so thick, and then it won't fit in there. So I took the original square one. You can see how thin that is. I put it in the position where one was missing. Now here's what I did here. See, there's no height restriction here. Notice this is just the width restriction, no height. This has a height restriction. This has a height restriction because it has to go into those little crevices. So what I did was took a hexagonal nut that worked, put it in the vise and filed two sides opposite, thin enough to go in there. Then I put the screw in place to hold it, and I have put a drop of super glue on either side and one right along that edge so that hopefully...
So you've kind of created a nut plate.
Right. We can back this screw out and it'll stay put while we put it together. See, because this is on the underside of the machine. This is one of our We Found It screws. But see, that's on the underside of the machine. I'll show you what happens to that one when I turn it over. See, it falls right out. So since this is going to be in here like so, I don't want this to fall out of place when I turn the machine over to run that nut in there. So now we're going to try putting the end cap on. All right, this was the nut plate right in here that we took from the bottom, put loosely into its slot, and you'll notice I have my little thin screwdriver run in because you have to wiggle this end piece to get it to go in. You got to flex a little here, flex a little here, and it'll slide right in, but we don't want to lose that nut plate. So the minute I got it in there, I ran the screwdriver in to hold that nut plate in place. Now we're going to move these guys around till we can get our special beveled screws in. Same process we did on the other end. Get them finger tight into their nut plates. And that is the hard part, is getting them to line up. Aha! Well, what we want these to do is hold everything securely while we get everything else started. So here we go. We've got one that goes in here. And these are my substitutes here. And these are the originals. I need 1, 2, 3, 4 originals on the top. And that leaves me one to put into this floating nut plate because the others are glued into place. So here I go trying it. Get it where I can see it.
And in it goes.
Now I'm going to go back and tighten up. I'll tell you, I had trouble with this nut plate trying to move around on me. It looks to me as if the original repair was done with 3M weather strip adhesive, which is good because that's a little flexible and floats. But what I did was put the screws into each one of the nut plates on this end cap and then put a couple of drops of super glue on the edges of the nut plate. Once the screw had it held into position, wait about 2 minutes, especially if you can sit it in some bright sunshine and let it warm up. Then I went back and I've started all my screws. Now I'm going back and I'm tightening them up. And I put the original screws here, here, and on the other end, and the original screw here. And these are our beveled screws that have to be in place. But on the back side, I put my replacement screws into those nut plates. I checked to make sure the threads were compatible. But so you won't ever see these. They won't get in the way of any operation, and they are holding the end cap in place. So the next thing we're going to do is set it up and see if it knits right.
Oh, joy.